They went out and they did their duty. Now, they didn't want to be there. Virtually all the young men who fought for the United States in the Second World War would much rather have been throwing softballs than hand grenades, would have much rather have been shooting .22s at rabbits than M1s at other young men. But there was an evil force loose in the world, and it had to be stopped. And they said, I'm going to do my part. And they did.
Well, D-Day was the pivot point of the 20th century. The great question of the 20th century was, who's going to prevail, democracy, fascism, or communism? It all came together on D-Day when it looked like it was going to be either communism or fascism that was going to be triumphant in this world.
June 6, 1944, Allied forces crossed the English Channel, landed on German-occupied France, and embarked one of the bloodiest battles in modern-day warfare. Over 160,000 troops and 30,000 vehicles land along a 50-mile stretch of fortified French coastline. The first phase, the paratroopers. 13,000 men dropped into pre-dawn hours to soften the German troops and secure needed targets. The 101st Division suffered great losses. Only 1 in 6 members reached their destination points. One of them was Louis Frey of New Orleans.
And you go out fast. I got to the door, I seen that, I said, boy, ain't that pretty. Man, all colors, 4th of July, flashes all over the place and everything else. Man, I said, that's nice. And then you're out. Jock, the chute opened. I looked up at my chute, and then that's when I realized those suckers are shooting bullets at me.
Lucien Laborde was part of the 29th Infantry and saw the first wave reaching the beach.
But the Germans held their fire until the ramps were down on the landing craft. And as soon as the ramps went down and the troops began to file off, all hell broke loose and machine guns from every direction.
We didn't know what was going on the beaches. All we knew that we was to go in, get there, and go forward, and go as far as we could.
Harvey Koenig of New Iberia was part of the Rangers given the incredible task of climbing Point du Hoc, a 100-foot-high cliff fortified with 155-millimeter guns and Germans shooting straight down at the Rangers.
You had 6 big weapons, 155 rifles. They could use those weapons on Omaha, Utah, or the ships at sea, mainly the beaches. When they found them, they was headed for the Utah Beach. If they could have fired them at Utah Beach, then Utah Beach would not have been made.
2 Cajun brothers from Houma remember D-Day. Bruce and Eugene Authement ferried troops and equipment at daybreak.
We had a little rough. It was a little rough because we had to move the bodies so we could lower our ramps to unload the personnel. And they were floating from right to left as the waves in the cart would go. They would move with the cart.
This German in the pillbox and found out just pressed one button and wiped out the whole anything in the valley there. And there must have been between 50 and 75 men at one time, just burned to death.
Many of the soldiers were transported in boats built in New Orleans and known as the Higgins boat, tough enough to ride up the shores and go back in the water without getting stuck or damaging the hull or propeller.
If Andy Higgins hadn't designed and built those landing craft, we never could have gone in over an open beach. So he's the man who won the war for us.
Louisiana entrepreneur Andrew Jackson Higgins first designed shallow draft boats to rescue Mississippi River flood victims in the late 1920s. 20 years later, his factories produced 20,000 Higgins boats for the war effort. Factory workers included Edna Plaisance Donnelly and her mother, who commuted from St. Rose.
They didn't have enough men to do all the work so in the shipyard, and they had to hire women too, so we went and see what we could do.
In 1994, Lucien Laborde marked the 50th anniversary of D-Day by returning to Normandy with his children and grandchildren.
I'm thinking of how many didn't get up here. There were so many stacked out on the beach that it just was unbelievable. It was very distressing even to make it to the top. You were very happy to get up here, but you knew how many you had left behind. These young men up here showed, when they crossed that beach, to be able to make this world safe for them. And when the time comes that the same situation comes up, you have to be prepared to give your life for freedom. That's my message. That's it. That's why they're here. When they find that going is tough and they're not getting all the breaks at home, just think back to this.
The way we fought World War II was developed in 1940-41, the Louisiana Maneuver. Starting in 1939, there was an awareness that we had a very obsolete Army. It was about 190,000 soldiers. It was a terrific battle within the Army. You had the old soldiers, the cavalry that didn't want to give up their horses, and you had the infantry that didn't want to mechanize. So we were terribly short of everything. We were short on leadership. We were short on the equipment that we needed. And they started to reorganize the Army to change the configuration of its divisions. The Louisiana Maneuvers in 1940 was fairly small, only about 70,000 people involved. In 1941, there were 400,000 people involved in maneuvers. So there were just an awful lot of soldiers in Louisiana, primarily in the central Louisiana, in the Louisiana part. But the War Department wanted a large block of land to conduct the maneuvers. Sam Jones was the governor. He worked through the Commissioner of Agriculture and through the local police juries, and through a concerted effort, they signed maneuver rights from 8,000 landowners that totaled 13,650,000 acres. I was 12, 13 years old, and I can remember one Saturday afternoon when all of a sudden a whole Army division started coming down from the north down what was then Highway 71. And you could see for hours tanks, half-tracks, jeeps, and soldiers. And we, of interest, of course, to school children at that time, our school in Belcher was used as a headquarters for one of the combat commands for a couple of days, and so we didn't have to go to school. The 41 maneuvers put in about $25 million during the time of the maneuvers. But as a spinoff of the maneuvers with the constructions of Fort Polk and Livingston and Claiborne and the building of those installations, 8,000 people were put to work. It ended the Depression for Central Louisiana. I joined the Army in 1944, but I can tell you that as you moved around in the Army, every old soldier had some kind of story about the Louisiana Maneuvers. The heat, the snakes, the mosquitoes, the poison ivy. I think the best quote that I heard was from, to paraphrase General Marshall, he was being criticized in Congress for the amount of money that the Louisiana Maneuvers were costing and the mistakes that were being made. And General Marshall, in his own way, said, "By God, Senator, I'd much rather have those mistakes made in Louisiana than I had in Europe." The maneuvers gave people like Eisenhower, who was a colonel, Patton was a lieutenant colonel, all those that we became household words in the 40s were captains, majors, and lieutenant colonels, and they are the people that blossomed. Patton made a lot of statements about the Louisiana Maneuvers, you know. I guess one that he said, if you can get tanks through the Louisiana Maneuvers, you can get them to hell.
Troop carrier and airborne have their final inspection.
We knew something was up. So the first thing I knew, we were notified to get ready. And that time we were given our job of what we were going to have to do in Normandy. All my men were ready to jump. So we got on the plane and took off along with all the formations, and we headed south, and we took a bearing on the southern coast of England and headed out in the Atlantic, and we ran into the coast of France. And I was standing up in the door. It looked so peaceful that I said, oh, this isn't going to be bad. As we got near our area, the green light came on and meant it's time to jump. But they hadn't slowed the plane down, and we were awfully low. But anyway, we threw our bundles out and jumped. Unfortunately, I only oscillated one time, and when I hit, I fractured some bones, a bone in my ankle, and tore some ligaments loose in my ankle. And I didn't know it until O'Hagan found me, and I got up to walk. I couldn't walk. So he hit me over in a ditch, and I stayed in that ditch for 7 days before they found me.
Incidents in the defense of Bastogne. Men of the 101st Airborne Division begin their march to the outskirts of the vital road junction town. The U.S. command had given one order: hold Bastogne at all costs.
The Germans had to have Bastogne as a center of transportation, and so they couldn't. We just wouldn't give up, and we wouldn't. Christmas Day, I fought all day long up to the little town of Champs, where the Germans broke through at night with white uniforms on. And so our men just dug down in the foxholes, and when they would get up against a building, it was a moonlight night, then they'd they'd kill every one of them up against a building, because they made just perfect targets for them. And it ended up the next morning, we fought on up until noon on Christmas Day, and it was almost hand-to-hand fighting. I was trying to make it to some woods, and a artillery shell hit about 10 yards from me, and a piece of shrapnel hit me in the side of my face, and it went in on the left side, and it knocked out 17 teeth. And then a piece went into my right side right here, and a piece in my right lung. And I rode back about 3/4 of a mile and got in an ambulance. And I was wounded at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I rode that ambulance till 5 that afternoon before I finally reached the hospital. And they immediately took me into the X-ray room, right on into the operating room. And I had a 3-hour local anesthesia operation. Funny thing, the doctor that operated on me was Dr. David W. Robinson from Kansas City. He made me talk when he was operating on me, and I talked about hunting and fishing in Louisiana. He said, when he got through, he says, you know, I love to hunt. Says, you're the biggest storyteller that I've ever heard in my life. I said, well, I'll invite you to go hunting with me if we both survive the war. He says, I accept right now. So after the war, I got in touch with him, and he accepted my invitation to go hunting, and we hunted for 2 mornings, and I've never had a better hunt in my entire life.
As an assistant G3, I was the assistant traffic control officer for Omaha Beach. We could hear the gunfire, the heavy gunfire. We couldn't probably hear the machine gun fire from that distance, but we could hear the heavy gunfire. But we thought that heavy gunfire that we were hearing was our ships, battleships, and destroyers and cruisers, bombarding the shore. But it was, of course, mostly the enemy guns that we were hearing. We were being told at the same time that we were being briefed on what was there, don't worry about it. That's all going to be neutralized by the time you land. So they said all you need to look at when you get to the beaches is a bunch of craters on the beach that there'll be nice holes for you to hide in. Well, when we got to the beach, it was in pristine condition. We were standing and just trying to keep our wits about us and keep from being seasick, which most of us were by the time we hit the beaches, because the seas were very rough. Once we got there, we wished we were back where we started because of what we encountered when we hit the beach. As we were coming in, we struck one of those sandbars. The coxswain on the craft thought that we were ashore because there was water around us, but it was shallow water. And when he struck that little sandbar, he let the ramp down. So we all went rushing out, thinking that we were right near the actual beach. But when we did, we found ourselves in deep water. So some of those in the craft drowned as they went out because they were very heavily loaded. When I got to the beach, I found that the traffic control officer, who was a colonel, had become a casualty. He was shell-shocked, we called it, and as we spoke in those days, he had gone berserk. He was just simply out of his mind. And so I then was put in the position as a 23-year-old Army captain of being the traffic control officer for Omaha Beach. And it was a formidable task. My responsibility was to see that the incoming troops to the beaches were moved across the beaches as quickly as possible so as to prevent a buildup or stalemate on the beaches. And of course, there was, when I arrived there was already a stalemate because we had people not moving off the beaches and we had dead bodies and equipment that were out of order that was blocking the beaches. My first job then was to try to clear up or to clear paths through these obstacles. I don't think fear came into the picture for me until the ramp dropped and I went out. And of course that element of fear persisted all through the balance of D-Day and even into D+1 because there was still enemy fire of some elements of fire covering the beach even on D+1. We had no question about the need, the justification, for what we were doing or being asked to do. And we also had I think all of us had a high resolve of patriotism to do this because it was something that if we didn't do it, then we could look forward to losing our own freedoms and those freedoms for our generations to come as well.
Alton Lanclos, F Company, 2nd Battalion, 28th Regiment, 5th Marine Division.
Harry McCauley, U.S. Navy, served on the USS PC-800. It was a patrol craft.
Menard Brouillette, Company B, 5th Pioneer Battalion, 5th Division.
Before leaving Pearl Harbor, our captain gathered us, and he told us we were going to a small island that we had never heard of. And at that time, they called it Iwo Jima, I-O-S-H-I-M-A, Iwo Jima. Later became known as Iwo Jima in our language.
Now, Iwo Jima was a rough one, but we had a lot of others. Okinawa was awful hard. Saipan, Tinian, and Guam and all that. So Iwo was not the only one. Actually, the thing that made it so popular, I guess, if you will, was the flag raising.
The Iwo Jima mission was the 3rd campaign of my Marine Corps duty, and I was 20 years old.
I was a machine gunner, 30 caliber lights.
We started hearing what seemed to be thunder, and we weren't told what it was, but later found out it was battleships that were bombarding the island of Iwo Jima from about 15 or 16 miles away.
But they were well secured in those caves. They had bombed it, I think, for 30 days, night and day before we landed. And it hadn't created any casualties because it was so well dug in.
And we went on to that gunfire in the darkness, and then by daylight we could see the island, and our job was to join the other small ships to clear the mines.
So once we got ashore, then they really, came at us, and they opened up on us. And it was just a mess.
There were many, many casualties. I survived the 13 days on Iwo Jima. I was wounded, evacuated, and I went to the hospital at Guam, then to Hawaii, and then to the States.
Sometimes it's difficult to talk about when you think about your friends and stuff, But it's history. It's done. We had a job to do, and the island just had to be taken.
I'm Frank Thompson. I was in the 483rd Anti-Aircraft Battalion.
My name is Phillip Wade. I was in High Battery, 3rd Battalion, 13th Marines, Wireman, and Artillery Regiment, 5th Marine Division.
Alan Fontenot, U.S. Navy. I was on a troop transport, and I operated LCVP Higgins boat.
It was supposed to be they said 3 days to cover the island. 7 days it would be secure, and they were getting ready going to use us at Okinawa. That was Easter Sunday, April 1. But it turned out a little different. With over 26,000 casualties, 6,800 dead.
Really, I never thought of dying. I don't know why. I guess young and full of vinegar. But anyway, it never bothered me until when I turned around and they started shooting at us. When the boat left, going back to the ship, they were shooting at us. But luckily, the bullets would hit the water, and it would just over my head,
That was our primary job, was to maintain communications. And you laid wire. You laid it on the ground. And tank went over, the truck went over, the shell busted it, you went out and looked for it, repaired the line. They brainwashed you in boot camp, and the DI kept telling you, it's for your own good, I want to bring you back. And I'll agree with him 100%. Today, if a kid would probably stand there and ask him why, and by that time it'd be too late. When they say duck, you ducked. Jump, you jumped. That's for sure.
You was so young that you didn't worry about anything. The only thing was that if they told you, you can do this, you believed them.
And we floated around in a Higgins boat for 3 hours or better. And I was seasick. I didn't care where I went, what I did. I just wanted to get on the ground.
And I called it the Matchbox Navy because it was Higgins boat made out of plywood. That's what I take the Marines in. It load them up and I take them to the shore,
We landed on D-Day, and I stayed back. My job was to stay back with the guns, howitzers at the end of Airfield 1. They was having so many casualties. They were taking men out of any place they could find them and transferring them up with the infantry up on the front lines. My sergeant told me that I was going up with the FO, that's up with the infantry. And went up there that day, and about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, that's when I got hit with the knee mortar. And it didn't even knock me down. There was just an explosion. My leg went numb, and I just pulled it up and laid down. And I was lucky. If it happened the first few days, I'd have bled to death. But they had so many casualties, they just couldn't handle them the first few days.
And when we hit the shore at Iwo Jima, we had a metal ramp that you'd pull a lever and the ramp was supposed to fall. We hit the beach, and the darn thing would not move. It was the Marines had to go over the side. Felt like heck, and now you're sitting like a sitting duck, And finally, the thing just fell down all by itself. So they loaded me up with wounded people and more wounded Marines, and I had to take them back to the ship. And luckily, we got away without being shot out of the water.
One thing I remember was the night they blew up the ammunition dump. We was across the road from them. The night I found out how fast I could run. The first time the bullet came by me. The second time is when I went by the bullet.
Well, I know it was important, but I don't feel like no hero. That's for sure.
I want everyone to know that my part was very minor compared to those Marines who were landed on the beach, and they really did the job for us.
Patriotism. You have to be patriotic to love your country.
I have a stepson. My wife had a boy when I married her, and every year for Veterans Day, he sends me a card, tells me how, thanking me for what we did.
Oh, they did think about the consequences. They thought, as one of them told me in an interview, when I asked him that question, what kept you going? He said, it was my job to help turn this century from one of darkness into one of light. And another guy said, listen, I was 18 years old. I had been taught the difference between right and wrong. I had my whole life ahead of me, and I didn't want to live it in a world in which wrong prevailed. And so I fought. You're damn right they knew what they were fighting for.